In this video, I'll be using this web page that I put together in order to go through some preliminary ideas before we move on to talking about Pan's Labyrinth and the other works eventually in our course in detail. And this particular post I'm calling Believing in Fairy Tales. And I will just take you through this page as we go along. The subtitle, as you can see, is The Multidimensional Nature of Imaginative Storytelling. And you not only have the URL up here, but I will be putting it in the extra information on the YouTube video for here. So you'll be able to follow along after this as well. The domesticating function of genres and definitions. Let's begin by taking a brief look at the following Wikipedia definitions of imaginative genres. Speculative fiction is an umbrella genre encompassing narrative fiction with supernatural or futuristic elements. This includes, but is not limited to, science fiction, fantasy, superhero fiction, science fantasy, horror, utopian and dystopian fiction, supernatural fiction, as well as combinations thereof. And in our course, we'll be using works that relate to almost each of these, almost every one of these. Science fiction, often shortened to sci-fi or SF, is a genre of speculative fiction, typically dealing with imaginative concepts such as advanced science and technology, space exploration, time travel, and extraterrestrial life. Science fiction often explores the potential consequences of scientific and other innovations and has been called a literature of ideas. Fantasy is a genre of speculative fiction set in a fictional universe, often without any locations, events, or people referencing the real world. Its roots are in oral traditions, which then became literature and drama. From the 20th century, it has expanded further into various media, including film, television, graphic novels, and video games. Most fantasy uses magic or other supernatural elements as a main plot element, theme, or setting. Magic and magical creatures are common in many of these worlds. An identifying trait of fantasy is the author's reliance on imagination to create narrative elements that do not have to rely on history or nature to be coherent. This differs from realistic fiction, in that realistic fiction has to attend to the history and natural laws of reality, where fantasy does not. An author applies his or her imagination to come up with characters, plots, and settings that are impossible in reality. Fantasy is distinguished from science fiction by the plausibility of the narrative elements. A science fiction narrative is unlikely, though seemingly possible, through logical, scientific, or technological extrapolation, where fantasy narratives do not need to be scientifically possible. Authors have to rely on the reader's suspension of disbelief and acceptance of the unbelievable or impossible for the sake of enjoyment, in order to write effective fantasies. Superhero fiction is a genre of speculative fiction examining the adventures, personalities, and ethics of costumed crime fighters known as superheroes, who often possess superhuman powers and battle similarly powered criminals known as supervillains. The genre mainly originated in, and is most common to, American comic books, though it has expanded into other media through adaptations and original works. Utopia and dystopia are genres of speculative fiction that explore social and political structures. Utopian fiction portrays the setting that agrees with the author's ethos, having various attributes of another reality intended to appeal to readers. Dystopian fiction, sometimes combined with but distinct from apocalyptic literature, is the opposite, the portrayal of a setting that completely disagrees with the author's ethos. Many novels combine both, often as a metaphor for the different directions humanity can take, depending on its choices, ending up with one of two possible futures. Both utopias and dystopias are commonly found in science fiction and other speculative fiction genres, and arguably are by definition a type of speculative fiction. Supernatural fiction, or supernaturalist fiction, is a genre of speculative fiction exploiting or requiring as plot devices or themes some contradictions of the commonplace natural world and materialist assumptions about it. Supernatural. The concept of the supernatural encompasses anything that is inexplicable by scientific understanding of the laws of nature, but nevertheless argued by believers to exist. Examples include immaterial beings such as angels, gods, and spirits, and claimed human abilities like magic, telekinesis, and extrasensory perception. Historically, supernatural entities have been invoked to explain phenomena as diverse as lightning, seasons, and the human senses. Naturalists maintain that nothing beyond the physical world exists, and hence maintain skeptical attitudes toward supernatural concepts. The supernatural is feared in paranormal, occult, and religious contexts, but can also feature as an explanation in more secular contexts. A fairy tale, wonder tale, magic tale, or Märchen is a folklore genre that takes the form of a short story. Such stories typically feature entities such as dwarfs, dragons, elves, fairies, giants, gnomes, goblins, griffins, mermaids, talking animals, trolls, unicorns, or witches, and usually magic or enchantments. Fairy tales may be distinguished from other folk narratives, such as legends, which generally involve belief in the veracity of the events described, and explicit moral tales, including beast fables. The term is mainly used for stories with origins in European tradition, and, at least in recent centuries, mostly relates to children's literature. Unlike legends and epics, fairy tales usually do not contain more than superficial references to religion and to actual places, people, and events. They take place once upon a time rather than in actual times. So, take a look at the words used in Wikipedia to describe the qualities of these tales. Supernatural, imaginative, fictional, magic, impossible, unbelievable, contradictory, inexplicable, childish, once upon a time. And compare these with the terms used to describe that which opposes the nature of this fantasy world. Real world, historical, natural laws of reality, plausible, scientifically possible, commonplace natural world, materialist assumptions, scientific understanding, laws of nature, skepticism, and veracity. The red or the blue? Now you might be wondering to yourself, yeah, so Wikipedia, like everyone else in the world, distinguishes between the make-believe world of fairy tales and the real world of really real reality, so what's the big deal? But what if I, like Morpheus in the Matrix movies, were to suggest that you might be living an illusion, and that, like Nero, you could choose to take the red rather than the blue pill? What if the world of fairy tales was actually the real world, and what we call real is a socially accepted fantasy, and that this might be as good a time as any to travel down that rabbit hole? Or what if we were to take Campbell seriously and suppose that we are suffering from the illusion of separation, and that even this distinction between the real world and the fantasy world, the red pill and the blue pill, is itself the ultimate illusion of the dualistic state of consciousness that prevents us from seeing the energies of eternity as they break through into time? Let's remember for a moment that Joseph Campbell said the following about myth. It would not be too much to say that myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into human cultural manifestation. Religions, philosophies, arts, the social forms of primitive and historic man, prime discoveries in science and technology, the very dreams that blister sleep, boil up from the basic magic ring of myth. Oh yeah, I said something about the domesticating function of genres and definitions. What I would like to suggest here is that perhaps these generic distinctions that we use to make our way around in discussions of imaginative storytelling might not simply be realistic ways of distinguishing between two distinct realms of narrative, the real and the fictional, but might actually be ways of domesticating or taming the wild beasts of our imaginations, so that now they only ever really exist in the never-never realm of fantasy, thereby reinforcing our illusion of separation. What if we were to say instead that the realm of fiction, let's say for the moment science fiction, that we have been raised to believe is in some make-believe world beyond the hard rock of reality, might really be another level of reality itself? And what if those experiences captured in what we call fantasy are in fact higher realities than those we call real? Would any of this make a difference in how we talk about a work such as Pan's Labyrinth? What if the so-called fairy tale level of the movie were in fact the ultimate truth, the ultimate reality that underlies the safer daily fictions that we call the real world? What if the purpose of terms such as fantasy and science fiction were to tame or domesticate the otherwise explosive and enlarging experiences of higher truths and realities? What if Ophelia, in the end, really is the amnesiac princess, now returned to her proper place in the underworld realm of the labyrinth, transformed into the palace of belonging?